Okay, so we saw our video. Paul always seemed to find other believers. Whenever he went to a city, if there wasn't somebody there, then he preached to them till he turned them into a believer. Uh, as they were going through the different places. Now, today going to talk some about Priscilla and Aquila, uh, Paul doing some tent making. Uh, why do you think it was important for Paul to find these other people to come alongside him?
Just like we like people who agree with us and think the same way we do. Fellowship and strength and encouragement.
And I was thinking about, when I go, like if I'm going to look at a piece of farm equipment or something like that, or to an auction or something like that, I like to have somebody go with me.
Especially somebody who knows something about farm equipment.
Right. I know a lot about like farm equipment, but sometimes, a lot of times I'll call Brother David and say, "Hey, road trip time. Let's go over here and pick up a piece of equipment, or go here and do this." And he said, "Yeah, I can go." And we'll load up the truck and trailer and take off. But you've got that assurance of having somebody alongside you. If you have a problem, then and we can we get on all kind of subjects going down the road. We talk about everything from election to to who knows what. So, but
I hate to change the subject here for a minute, but Bob, how many of y'all ever seen a tent being made? Been around tent making? I haven't. And I've always wanted to see exactly how.
Well, the process today wouldn't be anywhere near what the process was back then.
I know, but just the idea of it, I've never seen a manufacturing a tent. And it's unreal, but I'd love to see it one day.
Well, if I run across somewhere, I'll let you know.
Let me know. I'd like to.
Okay.
We'll all take a road trip.
Something
You
else,
know,
I love road trips.
and something else about them meeting, where he takes people with him, to me, it kind of reminds me of an old commercial you used to have on the TV, is that, you tell two people, if you got somebody with you, they're gonna tell two people, and then those people they connect with tell two people, and, to me, that was also building the Christianity church at that point.
The church and
we
spreading of the
First you
gospel.
do so much.
always
Yeah.
call it the ripple effect.
Yeah.
Because it waves on out, but it is.
Well, another question that the lesson writer asked, it says, why are some people reluctant to work with others? Maybe you don't like them. That's a possibility.
Well, look, in my job, when you're out with somebody else sees something or hears something that you don't right off the bat. They can point out something that you may not even recognize.
Right. That kind of goes back to about the equipment.
Yeah, they see it, they hear it.
I might crank up a tractor and it's and it's got a tick in it and I don't hear it. But if somebody else with me that knows something about tractors and motors and stuff like that, and they say, "I don't know about that," and to give you a good case in point is where I've been cutting some hay. There's a guy who has a camper for sale, and I didn't know that was the camper they were talking about. I thought that belonged to the property owner, and he said, "No, that's it." And I walked the guy, real young guy. I walked his dad around it, and I said, "Let me show you several things on this camper." It has massive water leaks in it, even though it's a 2018. And, because I knew things about campers and they didn't. So, even though they were going to sell it for cheap, it may not have been such a good deal. So, in this case, Paul knew the scriptures as he was traveling. He was raised as a Pharisee. He was, taught as a Pharisee. So whenever he went, Luke was with him. It doesn't specifically spell it out, but the language gives you an indication that Luke was with him during this time. And, you know, Luke actually was the author for the book of Acts. So he's recounting all these things that had happened. And at this point, you know, and I think a couple lessons back, the language changed to Luke said we and us instead of, you know, they and them kind of language. So let's see. So after Paul leaves Athens, he's traveled to Corinth. And Corinth was a major Greek city. It was destroyed and then rebuilt by the Romans. And it had more of a Roman flair to it, I guess. And, you know, it was still focused on idolatry. There were still temples for idols and things like that. It was a multi-ethnic metropolis. Corinth had a large Jewish population. And Paul, true to his travels, first place he goes is the synagogue. He teaches to the Jews and to the God-fearing Greeks. And the ones that, you know, he goes there, and you saw in the video, they basically kick him out. They tried to bring him to into court. One of the things from this lesson is that Paul stayed longer in Corinth than he stayed any other times. I think it was roughly a year and a half. Well, let's jump over to our scripture, Acts 18, 1 through 4. Somebody want to read that first section there?
After this, Paul left Athens and went into Corinth. There he met a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who recently had come from Italy with his wife Priscilla. Because Claudius had ordered all the Jews to leave Rome, Paul went to see them, and because he was a tent maker, he stayed and worked with them. Every Sabbath he reasoned in the synagogue, trying to persuade Jews and Greeks.
All right, so we talked a little bit about, you know, Corinth, and, you know, at this time it's located near the isthmus that connected southern Greece to the northern mainland. Corinth also sat between two prime seaports. And due to its position, Corinth essentially controlled the east-west trade routes between the two ports, as well as traffic on the isthmus between the north and the southern regions of the country. As I said, it was destroyed by the Romans. It was 146 BC. It was later rebuilt as a Roman colony by Julius Caesar in 44 BC. So despite that influence, they still had a lot of the Greek influence there. The city had shrines, was home of shrines, including the temple of Acephalus, the god of healing. The building around the temple served as a hospital of sorts, and patients would leave clay replicas of body parts that had been treated there. I thought that was kind of interesting. You know, you go in and you look, and there's a clay arm laying there or something. You know, that was what I pictured. You know. Also, it was one of the most prominent temples was dedicated to Aphrodite. Scholars believe the temple was home to at least 1,000 cultic prostitutes, highlighting Corinth's fascination with sexual immorality. So I guess you go and you pay your money and you say, I want that one, or I don't know how all that worked, but you know, you go to the worship service and
There was a lot of that going on back then.
yeah, you know, so
It hadn't changed.
and some I thought about that.
At
Say,
least we're not doing it in the church.
When when it comes to Aquila and Priscilla, nobody really realizes that that's the first husband and wife team mentioned in the Bible. They were the first two that ever teamed up together.
Oh, okay. I didn't
in the
realize.
Bible.
That's a good thing.
teamwork.
Okay, so he finds Aquila and Priscilla in Corinth, meets them. They are Roman citizens, and because of his homeland Pontus, that was a Roman province. So most likely they both were Roman citizens. And in AD 4950, Claudius ordered all Jews to leave Rome. And in the wake of that expulsion, Aquila and Priscilla came to Corinth. So that's how they wound up there. And this is not the first time that the Jews, or the last time that the Jews, because if you know your history a little bit, in Russia, years and years later, the Jews were told, you gotta leave. So that was part of the migration out of Russia into the other areas, into Germany and other areas of the Jews. Luke did not explain when or how they became believers, but they apparently were already Christ followers when they met Paul. So they had been introduced to the way somewhere along and become Christians. And Paul becomes a tent maker with them. Now, if you remember from earlier in some of our other lessons, Paul's Roman citizenship came from his father, who was a tent maker, and they believed that his father was the one that acquired the citizenship, Roman citizenship, because he made tents for the Roman army. So that's how Paul knew how to do tent making. And as far as how they did it, it must have been a tedious job and really bad on your fingers, because I can just imagine
Pushing those sword or whatever.
through something that
Using a bone needle to go through the hides. And
the hides, leather hides, or they knew how to make sailcloths back then. So it would have been hand woven cloth that had been coated with wax or oil or something. Used to years ago, you could buy oilcloth around hardware stores and places like that around here, and it would repel the water. So I would imagine it would look something similar, but that might be something I can do a little research on to see what I can find. But he stayed with them and worked with them, and Paul became, supported himself with that. Every week he goes to the synagogue. It's on the Sabbath, and Luke's wording suggests that Paul was persistent in his efforts in Corinth. It's possible that Paul only ministered in the synagogues on the Sabbath. Working during the week would have made it difficult on other days. Now, something I read said that they thought Paul was doing this because he was out of money. You can't travel around and eat and buy things if you don't have some money. So he may have been out of money at this point. And we'll touch on that a little bit further on. But he's going every Sabbath and trying to minister to the Jews and get them to see who Jesus really is. Verse 4 says, persuade. The Greek word pitheo, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly, to convince or to instill confidence. It is related to the Greek word for faith, pistesias, or something like that. And Paul challenged his listeners to be confident that Jesus is the Messiah. A guy doesn't go out and get beaten up, drug out of the city, left for dead, get prayed over, get back up, and go back in and witness to them some more and preach to them some more, unless Jesus is real. I mean, if you think about it, when Christ was crucified, all the disciples were like rats running into, where can we hide where the Romans can't find us? And then,
I started reading this about what Paul had been through. I think about what they've been putting Donald Trump through. I'm serious. The leaders and whatever. I hate to bring it up, but it just in my mind, he's another.
Yeah,
Paul.
you can see the resemblance
I
of
was
those
like,
things.
what happened then and what's going on now?
okay, so Paul preached both to Jews and God-fearing Greeks. You know, he didn't miss an opportunity. Anytime he had an opportunity, he jumped on it. All right, let's go to our next scripture. Somebody want to read that?
When Silas and Timothy came from Macedonia, Paul devoted himself exclusively to preaching, testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Messiah. But when they opposed Paul and became abusive, he shook out his clothes in protest and said to them, "Your blood be on your own heads. I am innocent of it. From now on, I'll go to the Gentiles." Then Paul left the synagogue and went next door to the house of Titus Justus, a worshiper of God. Crispus, the synagogue leader, and his entire household believed in the Lord, and many of the Corinthians who heard Paul believed and were baptized. One night, the Lord spoke to Paul in a vision. "Do not be afraid. Keep on speaking. Do not be silent. For I am with you, and no one is going to attack and harm you, because I have many people in this city." So Paul stayed in Corinth for a year and a half, teaching them the word of God.
Okay. So Silas and Timothy, they arrive. You know, Paul had went on ahead of them after the uproar in Berea, from Acts 17:10 through 15. So he left Silas and Timothy there while he headed for Athens. And then from Athens, he came on to Corinth. Elisha says, many scholars believe they came with a financial gift from the Macedonian churches that would allow Paul to focus fully on evangelism. Because, you know, Luke gives an indication here that he devoted himself exclusively to preaching. Doesn't say anything else about him doing tent making. So, you know, it was an opportunity for him. If he's got money, just like missionaries today, if they don't have any to travel and minister without money, so you got to figure out some way to make ends meet. And they didn't have the U.S. government back then to prop you up. He, you know, devoted himself to teaching and preaching exclusively. Paul was free to devote more time. The Greek wording means to hold something together tightly. It suggests being completely occupied by something. He's teaching to the Jews in verse 6. They opposed him. The Jews in Corinth adamantly rejected Paul and his message. Their hostility and abuse towards Paul was one thing, but Luke indicated that they also blasphemed Christ through their words and actions. It's getting pretty serious, isn't it? And it says, Paul responded to the mob when he shook out his clothes. The protest and judgment was similar to tearing one's clothes or shaking the dust from one's feet. Paul's actions symbolize a broken covenant between the Jews and the Lord God. And it said, he pronounced, your blood is on your own heads. The Jews would have understood the condemnation because a similar warning was used in Ezekiel 33, 1 through 9. And basically, kind of paraphrasing a little bit here, but Ezekiel 33, 1 through 9 says, start with verse 2, says, Son of man, speak to your people and say to them, when I bring the sword against the land, choose one of the men and make him their watchman. And he sees the sword coming against the land and blows the trumpet to warn the people. Then if anyone hears the trumpet and does not heed the warning, and the sword comes to take him, take their life, their blood will be on their own head. And verse 6 says, if the watchman sees the sword coming and does not blow the trumpet to warn the people, and the sword comes and takes some of one's life, that person's life will be taken because of their sin, but I will help you, I will hold you accountable. So Paul is basically saying here, and if you go and you read a little further and study that a little bit, he's telling them, hey, I've done everything I can. I've given you the warning. I've told you about Christ. He's shaking his clothes off and said, may your blood be on your own head. You've missed the opportunity to know Christ, and now it's on you.
Well, Jesus told, when Jesus sent them all out, he told them that if they won't,
Shake the dust off your feet.
if they won't follow you,
Shake the dust off your feet and
basically
go.
don't waste your time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Move on.
Move on. Let's try to ask this. How would Silas and Timothy's presence have encouraged Paul? Be like, seeing your best, they had to have a good relationship in the ministry.
They did a good job in the video with the reaction of their faces to seeing each other.
Yeah.
When they showed up, they did a good job of that.
I think that is kind of a thing, this might be silly, it's the teacher in me, but it's kind of like whenever you're having a little program at school for kids, high school kids, whichever age of kids, and their parents can't come, but then the parents do come, they were able to get away
Especially
for a
if they
break.
walk in late or
And you
something.
just
see
see the
them.
kids,
Yeah.
even high school kids would be like, that's my mom, that's my dad, or,
Yeah.
that my sister or my grandma came, and it was just like, wow, that's what it reminds me of, and I think that's what it's gonna be like when we see Jesus.
Paul and Silas and what all they done been through the getting loose of the jail, the earthquake happening. Silas made a very good witness. I was there. I saw this. I know what happened.
Yeah.
And when you got somebody with firsthand experience, you've got a good witness.
And,
And the stories are not going to change between the person.
they come along beside
You're right.
beside Paul and help him to minister, and maybe somebody's interested, and Silas and Timothy, maybe take them and say, hey, let me explain this in a little more in depth to you. While Paul's preaching, I'll tell you more. And hey, let me tell you about what happened in the jail when they put us in jail, and an angel of the Lord came in, and there was an earthquake, and all the prisoners, the chains fell off, and all the doors flew open, and without somebody to corroborate that, they think, man, this guy's been, he's been in some wacky-backy or something, so to speak, he's gone off the deep end. So,
It means a lot.
Paul had some people in them that could back up his story, what he was telling, his truth.
okay, let's see. I think did we read our last scripture here, the 18 through 21? I don't think we did yet.
I have not read that part.
Okay. All right, somebody read that for us.
Paul stayed on in Corinth for some time, but he left the brothers and sisters and sailed for Syria, accompanied by Priscilla and Aquila. Before he sailed, he had his hair cut off at Cenchreae because of a vow he had taken.
Close enough.
They arrived at Ephesus, where Paul left Priscilla and Aquila. He himself went into the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews. When they asked him to spend more time with them, he declined. But as he left, he promised, I will come back if it is God's will. And then he set sail for Ephesus.
Okay, so verse 18, he sailed from Syria. His stay was about a year and a half in Corinth. And it aligned with Jesus' command to reject fear. In the wake of his successful hearing before Gallio, ever how you pronounce that, in Acts 18:12 through 17, Paul enjoyed more freedom to reach and preach in the city. Upon saying farewell to his friends, Paul left for Syria. The second missionary journey was drawing to a close. And somewhere I saw something about, I may have read it in some other reading, but this was the first time that there was a ruling in the courts for Christianity. You know, he basically said, no, this is not something, a civil matter. It's not, something that I need to be involved in. He had them thrown out of the court and told the Jews, this is your own law. You need to go take care of it yourself. So, verse 18, he said he was accompanied by Priscilla and Aquila. Paul did not leave behind Priscilla and Aquila. Luke does not explain why they left with the apostle, but they must have believed that they would be more useful to the kingdom beyond Corinth. They already had been, displaced from, their homeland because of the decree of the Roman, and now they're coupled up with Paul. And I imagine Aquila is probably growing, and Priscilla too, are growing in the faith as they're hearing Paul preach. I mean, how do we come to preaching on Sunday morning? It's for our growth, right? To learn more about Christ. So, had his hair cut off, and it says because of a vow. Now, they are not sure, but when they stopped at Caesarea, the way you pronounce it, Paul had his head shaved to honor a vow he had made. We don't know this little known about what the vow was. If it was a Nazirite vow, which very possibly could have been. Now, a Nazirite vow, you vow to do no alcohol, no wine, no vinegar, no grapes, anything to do with the vine, no haircuts or shaving, no contact with dead corpses or graves, even a family member. Naza means to be set apart. The vow could be for a number of reasons, including to honor the Lord. Some people that stand out from Bible history. Samson was a Nazirite. He was instructed not to cut his hair. And that was where his strength was, in his hair. We know the story of that. John the Baptist was a Nazirite. And the prophet Samuel was a Nazirite. So, they would make a vow. And later on, we're going to see where some men make a vow to kill Paul and say they're not going to eat or drink. And I don't know if they consider that a Nazirite or not, a vow or not. But they don't know if this was what Paul, if he was making a vow. They really not enough information here from Luke.
It sounds like it since he did cut his hair.
It would give you the indications that it probably was, but it doesn't specifically spell it out in the scriptures. So we just have to kind of fill in the blanks a little bit, and we think it probably was, and also incidentally, women could do a Nazirite vow also. But their time was limited for the Nazirite vow because of menstrual periods. And so, they could make a vow for a short amount of time. The city of Ephesus was the seaport in Asia Minor, across the Aegean Sea from Corinth. It served as a resting place for travelers moving between Greece and Syria. And remember, Paul is on his way back to Jerusalem. That's his intended target, is to go to Jerusalem. And think later on in the scripture it says something about, they're trying to convince him not to go, but he says, no, I want to be at the feast. I want to be in Jerusalem by the time of the feast. So that's where he's headed. Ephesus was held in high esteem for two reasons. It was among the largest and most prominent cities in the world by the first century, and it served as a center of government for the region. Ephesus was a free Greek city, enjoying privileges many other cities did not. The city was full of ornate temples of pagan gods. The temple of Diana or Artemis was considered one of the ancient world's 7 wonders. The city was a major center of commerce in Asia Minor. Now, the Temple of Diana, it was destroyed by fire and rebuilt, and then it was destroyed by a flood, then it was rebuilt, destroyed by a fire, and then it was rebuilt. And the site currently is in a town of Selçuk, and the ruins can be toured today there. And if you go and you look up Temple of Diana or Temple of Artemis, she was considered to be the goddess of fertility. And because when I Googled it, it came up where you could buy tickets to go on the tour in Turkey. So I was like, okay, I don't think I want to sign up for a tour just yet. So
Those tours are real cheap, huh?
She was the goddess of Esther, was the one where we get the eggs into Easter now because of fertility. They integrated it into our sunrise service at church resurrection. And we play Easter with kids building their eggs up because of Esther. How we got that involved, I don't know.
all right, so it does tell us that Paul visited the city's synagogue and reasoned with the local Jews about Jesus. They wanted him to come back. They wanted to hear more. They needed more time. But he was in a hurry. I guess maybe his ship was sailing the next day or something. It doesn't give us an indication, but he just tells them in verse 21, I will come back. Paul's plans did not include a lengthy stay in Ephesus. He was in a hurry to get back to Caesarea and eventually to Jerusalem. And his eagerness may have been related to his vow or to the festival or the feast. We don't know for sure the whys. And let's see, what else do I need to bring out here? He promised to come back if it was God's will. Meanwhile, Priscilla and Aquila would remain in Ephesus and continue the gospel ministry in the city. Luke didn't go into details here, but we have to assume that they would be preaching, teaching. This is what Paul has told us. This is what we've seen while we've been with Paul. Because you got to remember, at this point in time, very few there wasn't a Bible with, the Acts written down or anything in it for them to go to. All they had was the Old Testament, Torah, and stuff. Do know that they were instrumental in mentoring a young man named Apollos, who became a powerful voice for the gospel in Asia Minor and Greece. How can we as believers support other believers? How can we support other believers?
Financially, emotionally,
Financially,
Testimony.
It's like we were talking this morning at breakfast, a couple of us were, and today's the anniversary day of my husband passing away. And I said, if it had not been for this church, I could not have made it. Because so many people just helped us so much. And that's one of the reasons why I moved back. Is because I wanted, because this feels like family to me. This church is my family.
Prayers, and support, other things like that. Okay, let's kind of wrap this up. Believers should continually seek to build relationships for the purpose of shared ministry. Partnerships with other believers provide a solid foundation for ministry, and believers may be called on to serve independently to further the kingdom. You know, I can't build the house by myself. It's literally this building. One person didn't build it by themselves. It would have taken 10 years maybe, and lots of equipment and, but with all the different people that came in and helped and of the building, well, the same thing with Paul was on his missionary journey to establish the church, and as the church grew, then they needed that continual support. Many times, Paul left others behind to strengthen the church, to teach them, to make sure they had everything not everything physically
like
they need.
Timbers and joists,
Yeah,
how they built.
and each member of that body, as the body grew, could fulfill functions of teaching, preaching, ministering. You have to remember there was no welfare back then. So, one of the things we saw earlier on in Acts is, some of them were upset because the widows were being overlooked in the administration of the distribution of the food and stuff like that. So, there's all these things that the church does. It's just like our blessing box out front, and I don't know where the food goes, who's taking it, but one of the things is the need must have been greater than we realized, because between Sunday and a Wednesday, it's empty again.
When believers are working together, you look at when we have a work day here, when everybody's doing something, how much faster the work gets done.
Right.
Everybody goes on. I was raised that way. I raised my kids that way. When they go to grumbling, I don't want to do this. Well, the quicker you get through the things you've got to do, you can go on and do kind of what you want to do. And we're not going to get to where we're going faster if we don't get through with what we're doing. We're not going to get there until we finish this work.
Okay. Any other thoughts, real quick? You got 0 minutes, a half minute.
Well, we didn't get into Apollo, but when he gets into his last part right here, we're taking that up next week.
I think that's in next week. So I hadn't looked ahead yet, but I'm pretty sure it is. Okay. Everybody good?
Good.
Thank you for being here. And we'll see you next Sunday, the Lord willing, or sometime in between. So I got somebody want to close with a word of prayer?
Doesn't matter, man. Heavenly Father, thank you for one more day here to be with learning people that want to learn and know your word and respect you, Lord. Just let us be this day. Just help us be better people. Keep us strong. Keep us in the guiding way you need us to go. In your name we ask these things, Jesus. Amen.